Dad turns around and he has a handgun and he puts the handgun in my face and he says, he grabs my mother's purse and takes her purse and dumps the purse out on the floor and kicks the contents of her purse across the floor.
The content presented in this podcast and YouTube show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health or a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard or seen on this show. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guest, and producers of this show are not responsible for any adverse effects resulting from your use of or reliance on any information presented.
Andrea, can you hear us?
Many years ago, I died for 26 seconds. There are so many people in this world that have experienced life events that have led to their soul purpose. Wake Up Your Soul with Andrea will bring you these significant life events that demonstrate how to use those moments for guidance and life purpose. These are our stories.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Wake Up Your Soul with Andrea. Today's guest is Bill Nugent, and he is an author, he's a writer, he's a spiritual guide, and he has quite the story to share with us. So we're going to welcome Bill, and we're going to dive right into this wild, wild journey that he has lived through. He's going to tell us a little bit about going to jail, his alcoholism, having a gun held to his head, and how he came to this great spiritual awakening. Let's welcome Bill.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And thanks for having me here today.
Well, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing your story because as you were sharing it, I was like, wow, this is, it's one of those stories where not everybody would want to openly share it. So, do you want to start with your childhood and dive right into that and the relationship you had with your father? You were telling me you started out saying it wasn't that bad, but then as you're telling me the story, I'm thinking that's
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
bad.
yeah. And I agree with both your points. My father was basically a good man, but he definitely had his demons, if you will. And he did the best he could with the tools that he had and his ability to be able to deal with them. But as a little boy, I was, as I suppose many little boys are, was a really happy, expressive little guy. And so I tried to navigate my natural way of being with over time who I began to feel like I needed to become in order to be safe. And so an example of that would be one morning I noticed that some of my friends were out on the street playing in front of our house. I grabbed my ball and I ran through one of the doors in the house and wanted to come out through the garage, which I had heard open earlier that morning. And when I came out, my father was at his workbench in the garage. And as I'm as quietly as possible trying to go through the garage and just sort of get by my father.
Well, I wanna
And
ask though, so I know what's coming and it's horrible,
yeah,
but you're saying, you were so quietly trying to get past your father, and I'm wondering, why were you so quietly trying to get past your father? Was there some sort of other instance that happened before this?
yeah, yeah,
We
I had
and we can
I
go back to that later, but
yeah.
okay.
No, I had just generally learned I never know what to expect from my father.
Okay.
It was a little bit of a Jekyll or Hyde experience being
Okay.
around my father. Wonderful dad who could be nice, or guy that you don't wanna be around in any way, shape, or form. And so that's why I was so quietly trying to get through the garage. He had his back to me and he's working on his workbench. And I hear his voice, and his voice was sort of just like, "Where are you going?" And my response was, "Just going out to play with my friends."
Yeah.
And he says, "Where's my half-inch wrench?" And so immediately my chest tightens and I'm afraid. And I say, "I don't know where your half-inch wrench is." And so dad turns around and he has a handgun and he puts the handgun in my face and he says, "I wish you were dead."
Oh my God.
And he says, "What are you going to do to help me find my wrench?" And I said, I, and then his response to my not knowing what to say is,
Mm.
with the gun in my face. And I, to this day, remember this sort of experience of the darkness of infinity at the hole of the end of the barrel.
Mm,
When I close my eyes and I allow myself, I can still see that
I'm sure.
and step right back into that moment. And I said, "I don't know where your wrench is." And then he just said, "Get out of here." And I ran out to the street as fast as I could.
But you had said that your dad had never hit you. So if he had never hit you, it's fascinating because you're saying you still had this fear of him.
You know?
Was it just that he would yell and scream?
Yeah,
Like,
it was a very much a psychological intensity, the threat of anger. I would see my dad put his fist through doors. I remember one night in particular where my parents didn't go out a lot. We weren't dirt poor, but we also didn't have a lot. Mom and dad were trying to make it in the middle class and
yeah.
have a nice little house and like that. And I remember one night, mom and dad were going to go out. And so mom put on a dress and she made herself up. And my mom was so pretty and she was such a smart, loving, caring lady. And my dad couldn't find his keys. And when I started to hear, "Where are my keys? Who's got my keys?" And then he directed his attention at my mother, thinking that my mother moved his keys. And the reason why he's so angry and experiencing the experience that he is entirely focused and projected on my mother. And he grabs my mother's purse and takes her purse and dumps the purse out on the floor and kicks the contents of her purse across the floor. And I remember in that moment intentionally knocking a chair over and trying to make noise to try and divert my father's attention back to me because something in me had me want to protect my mother
Yeah.
uh, and divert attention. And my mother just stood there crying and she just didn't know what to say and what to do. And so it was experiences like this where I never felt like I knew if I was safe. And if I did something by mistake or forgot to do something or something that had nothing to do with me, there would be a wrath that
Mhm.
would be projected on me or my mother, or I had two younger sisters, occasionally them, but a lot of the times they were spared that because they were so much younger.
Ugh,
Uh,
this is such a great example for parents too of how much just yelling and screaming can impact your children.
yeah,
Because you lived with so much fear, and it wasn't even because of somebody being physical with you, it was just seeing somebody have such a boiling level of anger can be
yeah.
so hard on a child, so
Yeah, now as a boy, my father left home and went out on his own at around the age of 15, as I understand it, because I would hear stories about my grandfather where my father would ask him for some change to go buy paper and pencil at school, and he would get beaten for asking. And so this was within my father. And so it's been part of my journey, even now that he's been gone for some years now, in finding forgiveness and peace in my relationship with my father. I have experienced an experience of my father. I didn't really experience as a little boy the truth of my father, except for maybe in some moments where I did get to meet and be with the loving man.
Yeah. I think this is where I've talked to other people about this type of situation where as a child, what you're going through is you're seeing this person's elevated anger. And inside, you start creating this whole narrative of what that actually means.
Right.
And to you, right, this narrative as a child is, I'm not good enough. I can't please my dad. He doesn't love me. It's all that. And that's what's so traumatizing and hard on a child. And it's not even, that's not really the reality. The reality is more of what is actually going through his head. And he's got his own frustrations of, I can't stay organized enough to find the keys myself, or I can't stay calm enough to find the keys. It has nothing to do with feelings of you or your mother. But
That's
as a
right.
child, we don't see it that way. And
Right.
so it's
Right.
really important for people
Right.
to understand
Right.
that. And even when you're trying to heal those emotions and things from the past, you can revisit those events and think about, okay, what was the reality here?
Yeah.
Because this is the reality I thought it was. But now that I'm an adult and I have, a fully developed brain to think about it, what was likely his thoughts in that moment?
Yeah.
Especially even your wrench story and the gun to your head. It was nothing about you. The man just wanted his wrench. And he was also probably just frustrated that he's disorganized and that
Yeah.
he misplaced something and frustrated that he can't remember where he put something.
Right.
He's
Right.
not frustrated at you because realistically, he has to know it wasn't you. You had nothing to do with
Yeah.
it, but he had no way of
Yeah.
controlling his emotions, and that's all on him.
Yeah. The wrench, the keys, he lost something, he misplaced something, and there was something within him. I assume it was an experience that he had as a boy or whenever it might have been, that said, if I make a mistake, if I lose something,
Mhm.
then I am garbage. I am whatever it was for him. I can't know that.
Your dad, at least, I think, recognized how his dad was with his anger, and he was abusive and physical. And so then your dad improved it. So, it's one of those generational things where every generation gets a little bit better, right? It just
Yeah.
gets a little
So
bit better.
and so for me, it was there would be this was not my only encounter with him with a gun in my face. And it would be whether it was a gun or with his hands or a tool, there would be at times death threats to a boy, uh,
Yeah.
me. And then my mother, trying to do the best she could along the way, would say things like, "You have to be really careful. You don't want to make your father angry." And so there's a little bit of reinforcement there that she's unaware that she's doing it. I can only assume, and trying to protect me, knowing what could happen. But walking those paths and saying what she's saying is reinforcing that I'm not safe. And
Mhm.
so in that, there's the sense, the feeling that comes from, in so many ways, a place of survival of I need to become someone else in each moment so that in this moment that I'm safe. In this moment, I need to be the vigilant little boy that hasn't missed something. I didn't forget to do something in my bedroom or perhaps an errand or a task I was given. And so would torture myself over, have I missed something? Will I be punished for it? And it all came back to my sense of lack of safety.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, and your mom was experiencing the same though, right? She also had that lack of safety, and you both were living in fight or flight constantly and
for
not
sure.
thinking rationally. And times are very different. Her generation was very different. Divorce was not near as common as it is now, and I'm not a proponent of it. However, I'm also not a proponent of toxic relationships either.
Of course.
But I can understand generationally that things were different. People didn't divorce, people didn't walk out on people. And maybe it was a good thing too, in a way, like to be so accepting of somebody's demons, right? We all handle situations with the tools that we have. And it's not necessarily wrong to accept somebody for handling things the way they do, because you have to know that they're doing that because those are the only tools that they have. And that's the way they know how to operate. Hmm.
In each moment of being met where we're at, whether it's the person that I love and I want to go over and hug, or the guy that I am angry at because he cut me off in traffic, we're always being presented something in life that we may experience from the perspective of this is happening to me or this is happening for me. And this is the way that we are so often met exactly where we're at. And it's up to us what we choose and where we go with that. And we can talk more about that
Yeah.
if you like.
I do well, yes, but I wanna I think that's realizations that came later. I wanna share the quarter story. The quarter story was very interesting as well.
Sure. A little bit later, I think it was a couple of years later, my father had hired a contractor to come and do some work on our house, and he built something on the house. And my father was unhappy with some aspect of that. I think it had to do with money, is the best I can remember.
Probably.
And yeah, and one night, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 o'clock, maybe it was midnight. My father comes and he wakes me up and he says, "Get dressed, you're coming with me." And so I'm both excited and scared. And
Ooh,
uh,
11 o'clock adventure.
yeah, and it's my dad, is he gonna kill me or,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so there's all sorts of things going on.
Probably surprise
And
vacation or death.
right. So I had a coffee can that I kept in my bedroom and I threw change into the coffee can. It was sort of my version of a piggy bank. And I got dressed and I reached into the coffee can and I grabbed a handful of change, which was not all completely, but it was mostly quarters. And I stuck it in my pocket. To this day, I can't tell you why I did it. And so I come out into the living room and my dad's sitting out there waiting and he says, "Come on, let's go." So we go outside and we jump in his truck and we drive 20, 30 minutes, something like that, to a neighborhood that I've never been to, middle of the night. And my dad gets to this one particular area in the neighborhood and he keeps driving up and down one particular street and circling back around. He's driving back and forth. And then he gets to a certain spot. And a little bit before he stops his truck, he shuts the headlights off and he puts it in park. And we sit there in complete silence for a few minutes. And I'm just like, what's going on? What is happening?
But you didn't actually ask that, right?
I was terrified.
Yeah.
And he says, "Get out of the truck." And so I get out of the truck. We walk around the back of the truck and he says, "I want you to kneel down on the pavement here in back of the bumper of the truck." And he said, "And I'm going to go over to that yard." And he said, "If you see anybody on the street, if you see lights start to come on, if you see anything that looks like another person," he said, "I want you to start coughing your head off as loud as you can and do not stop until you see me." And I said, Okay." And so my father kind of crouches down and, like this, runs across the street and up into a yard, and I can't see him.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I'm not super great with sound effects, but I hear
That's pretty good, Bill.
later, and I hear this 3 times, And then my father comes the same way. He comes kind of running back over and he's, come on, let's go. And so I jump in the truck. He jumps in the truck, headlights off, starts the truck up, headlights off, down the street a couple of blocks, headlights on. And I start to realize, even as a little boy, my father just slashed the tires on somebody's vehicle. And he, the next thing I hear him say is, damn, I don't have any quarters. And I said, I do. And so he drives not much further, and I think it was a 7-Eleven or whatever it was, and this is the day where payphones were still pretty common. So I give him some quarters, and I walk to the payphone with him, and he picks up the handset, drops a quarter in, dials a number, and I'm not gonna use the full language, but all I hear him say in a very calm voice is, "Go F yourself." And he hangs up the phone. And then we stand there for a second, and my dad turns around and he hugs me and he says, "You're gonna go places in the world, boy."
Mhm.
And he says, "You thought about something we might need and you brought quarters. You're a smart kid." And in that moment, having just helped my father slash tires, I felt like my father loves me. And I felt so safe and wonderful with my father in ways that I really didn't feel and I didn't experience. I felt accepted by my father. I felt maybe even loved
Mhm.
by my father. And so he said, "Come on, get," and we jumped back in the truck and he told me how great and how smart I was a few more times on the way home. And we drove home. And that's the last, we never spoke about it again.
Wow.
He said, "We are never to speak about this again."
Oh, well, yeah, I'm sure. So you never no one ever came to your house after that, and there wasn't any okay, it just kinda ended there.
Yeah, I think the contractor whose tires he slashed just either couldn't prove it or never put it together who did that to his tires.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance if he really was screwing over people, it wasn't just your dad, right? And so there
Right.
might have been a lot of people after him, but also then there's your dad clearly had elevated emotions at times, so it maybe, maybe
Yeah,
he wasn't really that screwed over and,
right.
some people are irrational with their emotions, so who
Yeah,
knows? But
right.
anyway, okay. So, you had a rough childhood, then you grow up, you get older. When did the alcoholism kick in? Was this before or after your success?
It was before. I will briefly tell you that a couple of years after the incident that happened, I guess it was actually a few years after the tire slashing quarters incident, I remember walking out. I was always a person that as a kid that liked to sleep as late as I could, but
I think we all did.
yeah, but, sort of uncharacteristically for me, I remember I got up early one morning. Again, I'm not sure why, and I walked out to the kitchen and I see my mother in the early morning hours. I wanna say it must have been like 5:30 in the morning, and she's standing in the kitchen, and I remember she has a clear glass in one hand and a bottle of vodka in the other, and
Mhm.
she's pouring it in the glass and her hands are shaking. Now I'm a kid, and so my exposure to concepts and ideas of alcoholism are sort of limited to maybe from watching the Andy Griffith Show, if anybody remembers watching reruns of that as I was a kid. There was a character named Floyd the Drunk,
Uh-huh.
and I certainly didn't see this moment and think, "Oh my god, my mother's an alcoholic." But I knew something was wrong and something was off. And I just said to my mother in that moment, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm just having some trouble sleeping." And we didn't really speak about it again. But over the next couple of years, the woman that I knew, who was in so many ways the one person that I felt safe around, that was loving and caring and taught me so much and encouraged curiosity and things like that, she sort of fell off the cliff. And for the rest of my life, she really never fully came back.
You think something happened with your father and your mother and something triggered her to just start drowning herself in the alcohol?
Yeah, I do. I'm certainly not an expert when it
Yeah.
comes to the science
Mhm.
of alcoholism, but I knew on my mother's side of the family that there had been in some of her parents, her aunts and uncles, there had been some alcoholism. And so I've heard people that know more about the science of this, the medicine of it, if you will,
Mhm.
um, that people can be predisposed.
Yeah.
And I would say my best guess is that my mother was predisposed and that the relationship and the nature of living with my father triggered that
Okay.
and was a coping mechanism for her. And so I think that's really what happened. And I suspect over time that my experience was something very similar.
Mhm.
And so in my teens, I started experimenting with alcohol, which as a teenager, I suppose is not particularly unique or unusual,
Yeah.
but most kids sort of figure it out.
Mhm.
For me, as I went through my teens, my high school years, things went from a kid who liked to party a lot to to a young man who was beginning to make his way in the world that became really reliant on it and needed it to function. And so I spent a lot of time being what I would say a functional alcoholic.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then how did you even become successful with still having an issue with alcohol?
Yeah. Really, what it took for me is I got a DUI and driving under the influence, driving while intoxicated. And I went to court ordered driving school where they had a certain component of that about alcoholism. And I remember me being the young, I have all the answers kind of a guy sitting in the classroom at night feeling like I don't belong here. This is a waste of my time. I'm just going through the motions. And if I can sneak in a nap while I'm here, I think I will. And I remember the sheriff that was one of the teachers, one of the instructors in the class, after the class pulling me aside and saying, I'm really worried that I'm going to see you here again. And as it happened, fast forward a few years, I was out partying all night. I fell asleep at the wheel or passed out at the wheel. I'm really not sure which.
Right.
And I completely totaled my car. I nearly killed another person in the process. Went to court, was given probation, and was really good at doing my probation for about 5 or 6 months and wasn't drinking, and then started saying things to myself, there's really no reason why I can't have a drink every now and then. And so that escalated into me just drinking more and harder than I ever had before. And I just didn't show up to probation and I violated my probation and they arrested me and they took me back to court and they said, I remember the judge saying, "Congratulations, Mr. Nugent. You get to spend the next year in jail." And they put me in jail. And shortly after I went to jail, I got introduced to a very large man by the name of Troy. And two of his, I'll call them buddies, grabbed me and drugged me to Troy's jail cell. And Troy said to me, "You realize I am the boss." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "What you got, I got," meaning anything that was mine was his.
Oh, yeah.
And then Troy grabbed me, and Troy very much looked like he could have played for any particular NFL team you'd like to mention. Grabbed me and threw me up against the wall and threw me across the cell like I was a rag doll. And
This is why I behave so well because jail scares me.
uh, and jail is not a place where you cry if you can at all help it, because if you weren't a target, you really will be a target. You will be seen as weak
Mhm.
and vulnerable. And so I did everything I could to lay low and stay out of sight. And after I was in that part of the jail for about a month or two, I think it was about a month and a half, they moved me to another part of the jail. I can't tell you why.
Okay.
And I never saw Troy or his buddies again. And I would sit on my bed, which was instead of cells where we were, it was sort of an open dorm-like setting with just a room full of beds. And I would sit and I would write and I would write and I would say nothing to nobody and I would keep getting notepads. And I was just, in so many ways, I was expressing myself in ways that I couldn't, but out onto pages trying to deal with what I was living.
Mhm.
And little by little, other people that were there in jail started coming up and saying, "You write a lot." Well, a lot of these guys couldn't read and couldn't write,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and they needed somebody to write letters to their lawyers, their mothers, their wives, their girlfriends, and so they started calling me Scribe, and so
I like that.
they would come up and say, "I need you to write a letter to my wife," and I would say, "Well, tell me what you want me to write," and most of the time they would say, "I don't know,"
Mm.
and so I would talk to them about what they were going through, what was happening, "Why do you need this letter written?" And I would write letters for them as if I were them, and so I was safe.
Mhm.
I would, as I became more and more accepted, I would actually get things. There's ability to be able to buy food in jail that's not just the basic food that you get every day and things like shaving cream and that you have to buy. And so I would, be able to make a little bit to make life a little bit easier because I was Scribe.
Yeah.
And in the process of living all this, you might imagine I said to myself, I think I do have a problem with drinking, and this can't be my life. This can't be
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah. You can't be in jail for nothing, and they don't do it lightly.
Yeah. And when they let me out of jail, they came to me about 6, 7 months into my 1-year sentence, and they said, "How would you like to go home?" And I
You're like,
said
"Nah."
I said, "That would be nice." And so they said, "We can send you home and you can serve out the rest of your sentence at home on house arrest." And so I said, "Yes, I will do that." And they said, "You have to get a job before we let you out." And so I got a job from jail. I knew somebody and I called them and I said, "Will you give me a job?" And it was somebody I knew that owned a car wash. And so I got a job working at a car wash, being able to go out only long enough to go to the car wash, to go to work, come home, and go to court-ordered Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and another treatment meeting that I was court-ordered to go to. But I'm beginning to get into the place at this point where I'm happy to do so because I
Yeah.
realize that my life is a disaster
Mhm.
and this can't be my life.
Yeah. I wanna go back to the accident where you totaled your car and you said you almost killed somebody. at the time and after, did you did that really sit in a I don't know, did that sit in the pit of your stomach, the
Yeah.
fact that you almost killed somebody? Or at the time, was it like, "Meh, whatever," didn't even think twice about it, like, "Oh, he lived, thank God, that was fine?"
No.
Or did it really tear you up, and did it tear you up more later looking back like, "Oh my gosh, I was so out of control that I almost took somebody out?"
Yes, it did tear me up. And a lot of, when I talked about sitting in jail and writing and writing and writing and writing, and even after I was let out and just filling up journals and notebooks, a great deal of what I wrote about was just that, in trying to process that, in trying to find something like forgiveness
Mhm.
for myself and not being my own judge and jury.
Did you come to terms with it ever? And I'm curious how, because I actually know of a few people that this story is really going to hit home for.
Yeah.
I know someone where it didn't end as well as it did for you. The person did not, like, you almost hit them. Well, this other
Yeah.
person did hit somebody and they did not make it.
Right.
Um,
There was a couple of times where I was able to speak to people that were involved with the case that resulted from my DUI, from this terrible accident. And it was made clear to me that the individual or the family that was involved with this gentleman who was injured so badly, that they were completely disinterested in being contacted with an apology. And I said, "Can we make it clear that I'm not seeking anything? This isn't about getting me out of jail, and I'm gonna, like, oh, I'm so sorry. Please say something nice about me or that I'm forgiven. It's just this is where I'm at in my life, and I'm trying to do better and use this experience to clean my life up and to hopefully do some good in the world as a result from this." And there's sort of a two-step process here in terms of my experience. I'm not telling anybody that I have all the answers when it comes to this, but there was a period of time, and I guess this comes back in so many ways to what I said earlier about always being met where you're at in
mhm,
your experience of life. And where I was at in the early years of this is trying to do the right thing and not letting what happened be in vain and just pass with nothing good coming from it. And so I did clean up my life. I did get sober. I've been sober now for almost 36 years. And and so I think some good came of that in life, and hopefully what comes out of my life as a sober man.
mhm,
And then over the years, and as I got much further along in my spiritual journey, I realized that this was given to me for me so that I might spend time with what it is to be in forgiveness.
alright, mhm,
And I certainly don't wish what happened on this gentleman that was involved in the accident on anybody. And so I don't mean to say that somehow his injuries were a good thing,
mhm,
but I think that from a bad thing, a good thing can step forward from that. And I think that that's been my experience. So I would offer to people, look to forgiveness. And in the forgiveness that I'm speaking about is not so much being forgiven by the other person and expecting that to be a result for you, that you're sort of, and I'm saying this in air quotes, pardoned or let off the hook. If that happens, great, amazing. But what I'm speaking to is more about forgiveness with yourself and finding a way forward as it relates to that.
mhm, yeah. How do you help people start to have a spiritual awakening? And I think there's sometimes a resistance that people may have to it because they don't understand what that means.
Yeah. So, first of all, this is just my come from. is that I never start with anybody saying, let's work with each other so that I can help you have a spiritual awakening. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't know what's going to come from any one person's journey, from their path. I am nobody's guru, and I take great care to not put on my shoulders that I am somehow a person's answer man. Uh,
Mhm.
I can point people in the direction of their lives and help them find the willingness to keep taking the next step forward on their path be so
Mhm.
that we can, whatever we choose to call it, awaken, become enlightened, whatever it might be. And so I start at the level in most cases with people as it relates to relationships.
Right.
And that includes, and I touched on this a little bit when we spoke a moment ago about me and my experience of forgiveness. The primary relationship is the relationship you have with yourself, but we get shown for us if we're willing, if we choose it
Okay.
in so many ways, what we're not willing to see in and about ourselves by our experiences of people around us and in front of us. That
Mhm.
in so many ways, those people are mirrors for us that if we're willing, we can either choose to have that be what sets us free, that we get shown about ourselves, or we might continue to live in that mode, much like my father did, where when I feel or think these bad experiences, these things that make me mad, less than, whatever it may be, that we stay in that space because we feel like the world is happening to me.
Mhm.
If
Mhm. I think people want to know what it looks like though to go through this awakening. How does this happen? Like how do we get there? What questions do you ask yourself if you're trying to dive into that and just kind of become more awakened to yourself? And I'm sure maybe your book would be helpful. So Bill has a book that's going to come out spring or summer here of 26.
right,
I can link that later after you release it. I can put it back into the episode. But for now, you have this book that is coming out called Unlearning Myself. And I think that's such a great title. And that really is what it's all about, right? When you're having this spiritual awakening, is trying to just unlearn the person you thought you were and really come home to yourself and who am I really? Because for so long, you get trained in school and in home, like who you are, who you should be. And then you finally, as an adult, you get to really find yourself.
yeah, yeah. We spoke up to the point of me being in jail and me getting sober. And
Hmm.
so I think perhaps using the example of my life about what came next for me might point towards some of the answers that I think you might be you looking for. And I went on when I got out of jail and I put myself back through school, and that resulted in me becoming a talk show producer. And I spent about a decade being an award-winning political talk show producer. And so I was back and forth between producer and reporter, and it was fun and exciting. It felt like a calling, but in so many ways, it was an identity that I created for myself that was very much a survival identity. That if I become the professional, competent man that has a life that's impressive enough, that will make up for Bill, who was an alcoholic and didn't have maybe the greatest childhood and spent time in jail, that it will camouflage. And really, I can see now in so many ways how, first and foremost, I was trying to do that for myself.
Right.
I was hiding me from me, and I
Mhm.
was placing blocks between myself and the truth, the reality of who I am.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm. I think the divine piece of it is really important as well, and understanding that we
it
really aren't that in control here. Um,
it's really it's been only always my experience that when I'm willing to, see that when I'm looking out into the world for the answers that I believe that I'm missing, I'm only always looking in the wrong place.
Okay.
That all the answers that we believe that are missing are within us all. Now, it may be true that whether it's a book or working with somebody or listening to this YouTube podcast, that those sorts of things will meet us where we're at and help us have a realization or take us to the next step along the way until we get to that place where we'll become willing to set things down, like an identity that I created, that I'm Bill, the impressive, competent talk show producer. When I'm willing to set that down and realize that it's okay to do that, and it's okay to go out and get the successful job, and it's okay to build a successful business. I built a big real estate company and made a lot of money before I lost everything. It's okay to want those things and to do those things, but we begin to see them as a distinction, as a discernment that I like and I prefer these things in my life. I like the great job. I like the great career, the business, the great relationship, the house, the whatever it is. But none of those things in and of itself is an answer for me.
Uh-huh.
The answer, the thing that has me be safe, accepted, and loved, or love itself, is already here. It's already within.
Yeah, I would say to kind of press forward in your life, all the way to the end and put yourself on that deathbed. And when you think about it, all these things that you think matter so much or are bringing you some sort of value, do you actually think that when you're on your deathbed, you still feel that way? And if you do, you do. And that's great. Then you're exactly where you should be. But sometimes when you think about it in that way, it's like, yeah, if today was my last day, I wouldn't really give a shit
Yeah.
about this or that or whatever.
And this is the nature of unlearning myself. Unlearning myself is not anything that's like magic. Like somehow Bill Nugent has a magic wand and he will tap his spiritual wand on you and you will be awakened. Unlearning myself, as so many other really great teachings are, if anything, a time saver. Something that if we're willing and if we're committed to it, steps us closer and closer and closer, sooner, faster than on our deathbed when we finally realize that, me holding a grievance and relitigating it in my head since I was in high school or since I was on that job in my 30s, and now I'm 75, 85, 90, and I'm dying. And I realized, why was I wasting all that time, energy, and effort and distracting myself from peace, from happiness, from love based on grievances? And that's kind of whether we're talking about it in terms of egoic identity, survival identity. They're in so many ways, different ways to describe the same thing.
Mhm.
They're actually an experience, and we let experience become real or believed, and we make beliefs out of experience
Mhm.
that become blocks that we place between ourselves and the truth that is peace and love that brings us to the place I think you're asking about as awakening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So your work, because you said you're a spiritual guide. So is your work then, what I'm gathering from this, your work would be to kind of guide people through their life experiences and understanding how those were valuable and happening for them and not to them. Is that kind of what your work is?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I always tell people, no matter where we're at, you may be going through the worst of the worst, and you may be somewhere that's, better. And no matter where you're at, I'm no better or no worse. I have no special power that you don't have. It probably, in most cases, is true that I'm further down the path. And if you think about the path, I often tell people the spiritual path is a little bit like DNA. Now, if you think about DNA and what makes us in the embodiment that we are as human beings, that you, Andrea, are distinctly physically different than me, Bill.
Right.
And yet our DNA is somewhere in the range of 99.8, 99.9, the same. So it's very little, very subtle distinctions that make you, Andrea, be the physical embodiment you are, and me, and be the gray-haired guy that I am. And the spiritual path is very much the same way. They're not identical to each other, but there's plenty that rhymes
Mhm.
along the way. So everybody has a unique curriculum, if you like,
Uh-huh.
that they are given for them by their experiences of life. And it's very often true that I can help you access the answers to the questions that you already have. But because you've accumulated the beliefs through the experiences and thoughts that you have over the years, the decades of the course of your life, sometimes you don't know what you don't know only because you haven't yet become willing to see them,
Mhm.
know quite how to access them.
Yeah.
And that's often where I come in.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense for sure. I think your story is valuable though, having gone through so many difficulties because everybody goes through different difficulties in their lives. And those challenges often lead them to feeling hopeless and
Yeah.
feeling like they can't overcome things. But you have gone through multiple things. You've gone through, things obviously with your father and then with the drinking and then going to jail and having to push through all that. And then your own career success and downfall and all that. And I think it's just helpful for people to hear from somebody that has been there. Okay, like he went through this, this, and this, and still was able to get through it. And so I think just hearing that story and realizing, okay, I don't have to have led such a perfect life to get to the perfect life, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really valuable. So I appreciate you sharing.
And I think for many people, they think about spirituality and it's something that can fall prey to what are stereotypical ideas of spirituality that are out there in the world. And so that can
Mhm.
range from dude burning incense, sitting cross-legged,
Yeah.
which is not necessary and at the same time totally cool if you haven't done it. Sure. So, like, it's neither necessary, but if you wanna go there and be really woo-woo, I'm totally good with either direction.
Different things for everybody. I mean, it
But
just,
everybody is on a spiritual journey, even those that don't think about spirituality
yeah.
in the context that I think we're talking about. It really does come back to the willingness to look at your experiences, and it's sometimes hard for people to hear, but willing to not pass judgment and to see anything as bad and wrong, or that we're saying that somebody really screwed up here and they're a jerk, or something that is judgmental. Most importantly, when it comes to you judging yourself, but it's in just seeing that really all that's required is to be willing, even for a moment, to just be wrong about the way you've had it
Mhm.
and just look at it and shift that perspective from the world is happening to me and I'm having all these bad experiences, all these things that I don't like, or me questioning my worthiness or whatever it might be, that in so many ways, subtle or obvious, those are things that we fall into based on what the world has trained us, has taught us that
Mhm.
this is who I need to be
Yeah.
in order to get here, in order to become what I think I need to be.
Yeah, our
Yeah.
perception absolutely creates our reality, and then when we can understand that, we can also understand that we can go back and create a completely different perception of a situation that we have lived through,
Yeah.
and then we can start living in a new reality.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I would just, if you don't mind, I would just offer one change of word from my perspective, and I would just drop create.
Mm.
And there's really a perspective of there's nothing new to make, there's nothing new to get.
Mm.
There already is everything that you need if we are in the modality of awakening, of
Mm.
deep awareness that everything that we need is closer than our own breath if we just get ourselves out of the way.
Yeah.
It's really so simple, but it's often not easy.
Mm.
But it's very, very simple. This is not a complicated thing.
Yeah. I still don't know that I would drop the word create because I do believe we can create by shifting, just rewiring our thought process, which is a creation of thoughts and the way we shift them. But
Okay.
yeah, we can all have our own way of working through
Yeah.
it. And I don't believe there's any wrong way either, right? Like,
I
and I think what I say is going to resonate well with some people, and what you say is going to resonate really well with other people. Like, we all just have to hear things and feel them in a different way.
It's all meeting us where we're at.
Thank you so much for being here today, Bill. Where can people connect with you if they want to find you?
Sure. I'm gonna throw a few different things out. So
Sure.
the first thing is my webpage
Okay.
is unlearningmyself.com. And I just put up, I have a free ebook, which is a guide, a basic 101 guide to awareness or awakening. And the guide will help you unlearn rules that currently keep you from peace. And the guide is called A Sacred Desire, the Armor, and the Altar. You can also find me on Substack
Uh-huh.
at theunlearning.substack.com. And those are the primary ways that you can find me out there on the internet.
Well, great. Thank you.
Really been wonderful speaking with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.